Hello, Hellgate Osprey Cam viewers, and welcome to our live chat Q&A today. Let me start by introducing our experts in today's conversation. Right now, only one's present because the other happens to be a little stuck in traffic, but you're looking at Dr. Erick Greene, a professor at the University of Montana, and one of the founders of the Montana Osprey Project. And hopefully in just a few minutes, actually he's not up on screen yet, let me bring him in here. There he is, there's Erick. And hopefully joining us in the next few minutes will be Rob Domenech, who's a raptor specialist and the executive director of Raptor View Research Institute. How are you doing today, Erick?
I'm great, thanks. Yeah, really excited. Looking forward to chatting with folks about the Ospreys and what's going on this summer. It's been a really interesting summer, and yeah, catching up with all the great questions that have been submitted.
Great. Well, just to let people know today how this is all going to work, for the next hour or so, we're going to try and take a deep dive into all things Osprey, and we're going to leverage the knowledge and experience of our experts on screen here, starting with Erick, our first expert on screen, to add some context to what you're seeing on cam, as well as to give you a better idea of what's happening beyond the view that the cams can actually reach. So before we get going, and we'll do this for Rob when he comes in, but we have so many new viewers every year that it might not be that they even know what the Montana Osprey Project is, and they might even just only know about this camera. So I thought it'd be great if you could give a little orientation to what the Osprey Project is, Erick, and just sort of some orientation to that organization.
Yeah, absolutely. The Montana Osprey Project. Oh, here we've got Rob Domenech coming
Excellent.
in. Yeah.
Good to see you, Rob. You guys are going to sit nice and close.
The camera. No, come close up. Let's see.
Oh, we're opposite.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Erick Greene. Whoops. And this is really glad to have Rob Domenech here, who's the executive director of Raptor View Research Institute, which he'll talk about. But this is really special for me because Rob really was one of the founders of Montana Osprey Project, and he started a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And he's one of the world's leading experts on raptor migration, conservation, raptor ecology. So we're really lucky to have Rob here, and he'll talk a little bit more. But Charles just asked me a little bit, give an overview of the Montana Osprey Project. It's sort of, we've got a lot of different things going on related to ospreys, and we'll touch on a bunch of them. Most of you know about the camera, and that's why you're watching. And this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. This is one small part of the larger osprey stuff we do. And this started off as a project in ecotoxicology. And what that means is using ospreys, since they're at the top of the aquatic food chain, to help tell us about pollution, specifically heavy metals related to mining. And maybe I'll turn it over to Rob now to talk about, because he really got this going, his idea about using ospreys to monitor pollution in Western Montana.
All right, thanks. I made a few notes. Sorry, traffic was a little crazy trying to get here. Everybody in Missoula is usually 10 minutes late, and well, I almost made that mark. So yeah, the project, I was talking with somebody today at our banding program, which we didn't have any chicks in the nest, but that's another story. The project really has morphed and changed over the years, but there was no real plan. Long-term studies are a lot of what we do. So coming up with specific questions and exactly what we want to know and see or research isn't always easy for us. So anyway, the project started more of just like, it seemed like a golden opportunity, sort of this low-hanging fruit. We have all these osprey. We had the Superfund site, that is the Clark Fork from Anaconda basically down to the Milltown Dam. And it was a great opportunity, as Erick said, to use osprey as biosentinels, if you will, to gauge the health of the aquatic ecosystem pre and post dam removal. and that's what we've been doing and identifying hotspots. But we never, like Erick will talk about a little more. We were looking at like the top 5 heavy metals from the mining, but what really came out, something we didn't expect, was mercury was a big problem. And Erick can talk about that, but we really weren't looking for that. But we were looking for arsenic, cadmium, lead, things of that nature. But the mercury is what really took us back.
Can I jump in here a little bit? Yeah, just for some of you who aren't in Montana and don't know the story. So we're on the Clark Fork River here, and about 150 miles from here upriver to a town called Butte, which was a huge copper mining town. That whole section of river for about 150 miles had been, at one time, it was the largest EPA Superfund site in the country. And Rob mentioned all these heavy metals that basically washed out from the tailings, the mine tailings, for the last 100 years. And there was a dam just upstream from where we're sitting now in Missoula. And a lot of the heavy metals and other toxins precipitated out. And so just to give you an idea of the concentrations of heavy metals that were in the river here, copper is a heavy metal, and it is got an affinity for calcium. So I've got some bones. So if animals die on the floodplain and their bones are just lying around on the dirt, here's, for example, this is a bit of a cow bone that had just been lying on the dirt around here. And you can see it's green. It's basically a solid copper cow bone. And here's a deer bone, similar sort of thing. You can see it's bright green. So it just gives you an idea of the super high concentrations of these toxic metals. So there's been this ongoing cleanup of this Superfund site, which has been really exciting. And so Rob had the idea of using Ospreys to monitor how well this cleanup was going. And as Rob said, so we've been taking blood and feather samples at a whole series of nests throughout Western Montana, basically, and analyzing them for these heavy metals to see and letting the Ospreys tell us how the cleanup is going.
Yeah, and that's been really interesting. When we measure, for instance, mercury in these birds, we look at it in micrograms per liter. And just to give you some numbers, 50 micrograms per liter would be the low, like almost baseline for our study area, and high would be like 2,700. And so we can look at these birds. We know that they're being provisioned from areas no more than a mile or two, even closer from their nest. And so we can get a good idea of where these heavy metals are coming from, the sources of them, and how they may be playing out in the aquatic system.
And so to make a long story short, so this has been going on now for over 10 years, the monitoring the Ospreys. And the good news is that the levels of heavy metals in the blood and the feathers of the chicks is really good. It's really low levels. And one of the surprises to us, if you want to be a healthy osprey chick, the best place to be is right up near a place called Anaconda, which is where the original site of the mine tailings. So that was ground zero for the source of these toxins. And now those osprey chicks have really low levels of these heavy metals. As Rob said, the mercury is something that was discovered just serendipitously, but that's turned out to be the major focus of the scientific research now, because mercury is real bad news. A lot of the eggs are dying and not hatching, we suspect, because of mercury toxicity in some areas. So that's kind of the focus of the research.
Yeah, well, that's a great introduction to everything that the Montana Osprey Project as a whole is trying to really get a handle on. And I think it'd be remiss to say there are a lot more partners than just the two of you in that room who play an important role in that project, correct?
That's right, yeah. We really wouldn't be here if it weren't for Heiko Langer, he was the head of the biogeochemistry lab, and it was his office, and it was Heiko who I originally just walked into his office, and I jokingly say, to quote Heiko, he said, Rob came in and started asking me some stupid questions about how to get at these questions that we like to measure heavy metals in ospreys. We didn't know if we should look at eggs, tissues, or whatnot, but that was the start of it. And he really was passionate about this project, and he had all the background information on the sediments in this whole aquatic system. So it was a perfect match for him to look at it basically from ground up. No pun intended. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and we all miss Heiko. I hope he's still doing well wherever he is these days, whether it's kite surfing or working for that matter. So, we've gotten like a flood of questions from viewers, and I think that just to give everybody a sense of how this hour will kind of work out, we're about 10 minutes into it now, and we're going to sort of like try and work through a bunch of these questions, but move through a couple of sort of themed areas. And really the elephant in the room for a lot of people and a lot of questions we got was this year at Hellgate, but this year after 3 years of challenges already at Hellgate. And, specifically relating to the food supply, high water, and sediment. So I thought I'd just start with sort of a couple of big picture questions that came in from viewers. Susie wrote over email. She says, the last few years, the chicks have suffered or died due to starvation because of difficult fishing. This was never the case with Stanley. Is Lewis not an experienced enough fisherman, or is something happening with the river in the last couple of years? For example, extra runoff from the recent development along its bank that's affecting fishing. And so there were a few like that, as well as sort of even broader ones, like this one from Patricia, who was wondering, is climate change affecting spring weather for the ospreys, snow melt, snow amount, and also asking about development and runoff. So I know those are big ones to bite off, but I thought if you guys wanted to give your take on this last, this season, as well as put it in the context of what's happening there on the Clark Fork, that would be really helpful to most viewers.
Will I start off, take a first crack at this?
Yeah,
Rob,
I see Eric has some good material here.
And then Rob can jump in. Yeah, we're really, really excited about this pair, Iris and Louie, with their one chick this year. And just to recap, so Iris's former mate Stanley died. We suspect. Louie may be around. She's squawking. He died 3 years ago, and this new male, Stanley died 3 years ago. We suspect he never came back from migration. And this new, what we suspect was a young male, showed up, and he's named Louie. And I know a lot of people have been thinking that he's lazy, or he's no good fisherman, no good husband, and that kind of stuff. But I just want to emphasize that these questions that people have been asking are all really good and very profound and important. The fishing conditions in the rivers have been extremely difficult and challenging the last few years. And the reason probably has to do with changing patterns of runoff in the river. And that's probably in large part due to how climate is changing here in the Northwest. So I've got a little, viewers will remember that in certainly April and May, the Clark Fork was screaming. It was at almost record flood levels. There's only been one flood in the last 100 years that was higher than this year's water. And the water was murky chocolate soup, basically. And in this graph that's pulled up now, this shows the river discharge since April, and it goes till today. The blue line shows the actual discharge in the Clark Fork measured right here. And this is cubic feet per second. So you can see that the high point was about 12th of May. There was about 30,000 cubic feet per second of water screaming down the Clark Fork. And if you look at the yellow line below, that's the 89-year average for runoff in the Clark Fork River. So you can see that the blue line is way, way, way above the yellow line. I also want to point something out. If you'll notice the grid marks are not even. This is what we call a logarithmic scale. So for example, on the 12th of May, it looks like maybe there's twice as much water as the long-term average. Well, it's actually like 5 or 6 times what the historical average has been for the amount of water at that time of year. So what we're seeing is that these rivers in the West, that are mainly fed by snow and rainwater, they're getting, most of the snow is melting off in the mountains earlier than historically it had. And so we're getting what are called flash droughts now. We get kind of too much water early on, right when the ospreys need to be bringing in fish for their young and chicks. And then actually later in the summer, in July and August, late July and August, there'll be drought periods when all the snow is gone. So Louie definitely, there was a couple days where he didn't bring in a fish for 24 hours and another one for 36 hours. That's in part probably because he is a young bird. We suspect he may be 5, 6 years old. We don't know. But it's really hard to be a good fishing osprey. It takes a long time to get those skills. And also I want to point out that we've been looking at a lot of other osprey nests all up and down the Clark Fork. And there's been lots and lots and lots of nest failures from experienced pairs all up and down the Clark Fork. So it's not Louie. It's just, I think it reflects really challenging fishing conditions with super high muddy waters right at these critical junctions. And Rob can talk about, we went this morning to band a chick at another nest here in town, and Rob can tell what happened at that nest.
Yeah, well, we had a community group, and we were all prepared to go into the nest and do what we do, where we blood sample and band and color mark with auxiliary band. We got there and we didn't see the adults, and right away we obviously were concerned because the female, as we know from the camera, is almost always right there on, over the chicks. And we don't know what happened exactly, but it may have something to do with what Eric was talking about and how stressed these birds are and how they're really trying to provision a young, but the young bird had died. It either fallen out of nest, was pulled out of nest, or maybe even fell off the nest. I've seen that where the young osprey are so hot and they're panting and they're trying to thermoregulate, and they get right on the edge of the nest. And you always think if a gust of wind happens or something where, you know, they can just, they're on that sort of precipice. But yeah, the bird had died. It was our last nestling in that nest. I think, I don't know, did we originally had 2 that we knew of, right?
There were 2, yeah. And this morning there were none. So, but I'd also like to say that, you know, this nest started off with 3 chicks and 2 of them starved. And I know that was hard to watch for many people, but I guess I'm delighted now that there's one. In a way, this makes sense. It's kind of as it should be now. There's only enough fish being brought in by Louie, and Iris has been fishing too. There's only enough fish to really provide for 1 chick. And so if there had been 2 or 3 chicks, they all would have been not in very good shape. And so, and this chick getting all the food, this chick is a real porker, and it is growing like crazy. Right now it's kind of at that awkward stage where its wings have shot out. Its wings are so long, it doesn't really know what to do with them. It's starting to flapper size, to exercise a little bit. But whoa, going on a tour here.
Well, that's actually a great jumping off point to another question that we've had. That it's a great segue. I think you guys will be able to see this if I throw it up there. There was, oh no, sorry, wrong. Fade over to this. Maybe. Oh, that's why. So I don't know if you can see this graph, but it was put up on the screen. So we got a number of questions about not just the chicks being impacted by this dearth of fish, but also the adults. And somebody wrote over email wondering if it's likely that any adult ospreys have starved to death. Several questions about will Iris and Louis or other adult ospreys be able to gain enough weight for migration, and several questions about whether or not the chick is on target in terms of its development, because people are watching lots of different cams across the internet. They're seeing chicks in these different stages and wondering, are our chicks gonna make it the way they're supposed to?
Yeah, I'm really hopeful that this chick will make it. It's growing really well. It's right on target. It looks great. Its feather development is right on target. Its legs and its wings have certainly outgrown its ability right now to control them. So it's looking great. One of the things that we see that's really interesting is a huge spread in how in ospreys the stage of the chicks. So on Monday, Rob was up just north of here, and he was at a nest. And tell him what you found in the nest.
Yeah, first time in 12 years of doing this, and 450 banded birds or so. We rose up and we just saw a couple eggs in the nest, and the assumption right away was, oh, they're addled eggs. We'll collect them and bring them to the lab. And when I got down close to the egg in the bucket truck, I could see its little beak coming through, and so it was just hatching.
So we've got nests around here where there's some really ginormous chicks, pretty big. And then on Tuesday, Rob was at a nest not too far from here where the eggs were just hatching. So we've got probably, about over a 2-month spread right here, right around Missoula in hatching dates. So we're seeing, so the question is a good one, how are the chicks at the Hellgate nest doing relative to others? There's a lot of variation. It depends on when the females lay the eggs. But this chick is looking really good to go. And if you bring up that graph again, Charles, it's a really good point. Being a breeding adult seems to be really pretty stressful. So what this graph shows is on the vertical axis, that's the mass of the adult birds in grams. So 1,900 grams. That is about 4 pounds, and that shows the line for females. This is information from a great osprey biologist, Alan Poole. These are from birds in Massachusetts, but it's a very similar story here. So the upper line shows females, which weigh a lot more than the males. So the one that's lower is down about 1,500 grams at the start of the breeding season. And you can see that as the breeding season goes on, both males and females lose weight. And the females, surprisingly, lose more weight over the breeding season than the males. You can see that line goes down more steeply. And so in some cases, by the end of the breeding season, the females may have lost 10% of their body mass. It seems a little counterintuitive because Iris is just, sitting on the nest all day. It doesn't seem like she's exerting herself, and yet what these data should tell us is that just maybe not eating as much as she could. And she's out. She's going to be cooking today. The next week or so, it's getting up towards 90. She's going to be really, really hot, and you'll see she does an amazing job. Her job right now is to shade the chick and keep it cool, and that's probably pretty stressful. So you can see that over the course of the season, both the males and females do lose body mass. We've never seen around here the adults starving. The chicks will starve in some years, as we've seen, but we haven't seen adults starve. And then I'll turn it over to Rob to let him talk about these birds maybe leave to migrate in worse condition than when they arrive.
Well, this graph is interesting too. And one of the things I was looking at this earlier I think this is in the BNA. And I wondered if the egg laying equipment of the birds, from courtship, they're getting ready to lay eggs. The females are probably, they have all that going on inside of them. And I wonder if throughout the season that starts to dissipate and go away. If that has something to do with that disparity or that big decline. But getting back to the question about whether or not the adults, I think these adults, our observations in particular with the transmitters, is we're able to even if the birds leave the nest site area, which they rarely do. Today we were watching the female come in, and she was actually nest building even though she didn't have any chicks. So they generally will stick right around their area, an area they're familiar with. Our telemetry data tells us with the adults that they know exactly where to fish. And but when they do leave, I think there is a risk of them getting in trouble. And for some reason, occasionally they will. And we had a female from, I think her name, it was Olive. Some of the viewers might have tracked her from the MPG. And she turned up in Rock Creek, which is a drainage just about 20 miles east of us. And we found her, we zeroed in on her transmitter, and we hiked up a hill that looks a lot like that one actually in the screen. And we got to the base of a giant ponderosa pine, and it was a bald eagle nest right above it. So we think she might have got killed. So I think there is some risk if they're so food stressed that they actually leave their known territories. One thing we've learned, and not to go off too much, is that these birds stick to very tight territories, whether it's their summer breeding range or their wintering areas. So tight, in fact, that we often think that the transmitters stop moving, in particular on their wintering grounds, because they're just these really tight areas that they're very, they know very well.
So these birds, when they get to wherever they're going to winter, sometimes they'll just spend 7 or 8 months in essentially 2 or 3 trees on a nice lake. They hardly move at all, and they're just fishing. So
well,
we suspect that.
Go ahead, finish. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's it.
And one more thing, and one of the questions suggested body mass for migration, and something that I like to point out to folks is that raptors, as many of us know, I'm sure in this forum, they don't do sort of your classical migration strategies where they build up big fat reserves and then blow them out, stage up again, and then go. We do see some stopover a couple days here and there for feeding, but for the most part, these birds are utilizing updrafts and thermals, and so they don't have to power their migratory journeys, if you will, by building up big fat reserves and taking in all these calories. I think that, just by the way that they move and utilize ridges and updrafts, they can conserve a lot.
It's neat with the satellite transmitters that Rob will talk about a little bit more in a minute. You can see this, the birds actually soar right along ridges, and sometimes they don't flap for a long time. They're just using the updrafts like a hang glider, and they're very, very smart about how they get from here thousands of miles south to Costa Rica or Nicaragua or other places.
Yeah, to watch hawks on migration is really an amazing thing. If you ever get the chance to visit, there's a number of great hawk migration spots, both in the west and the east. I encourage people to do a little Googling if you're ever interested in seeing it, because it can be really fun to watch sometimes thousands or even tens of thousands of birds stream by.
That's what got me hooked on raptors, by the way.
Me too. That's exactly it. So sort of jumping off a little bit into this topic of fishing just a little bit more, a couple of thoughts, because we were talking about fidelity to nest sites or wintering sites. One question that we got was, how bad does it have to get before that breaks down and they go someplace else? How many years do you got to fail? How bad does the fishing have to get before you might leave? Do you guys have any information that that you've come across?
That's a good question. I've asked that question myself, and I don't have the answer. What does it take? I mean, what cues? Do you mean where they abandon the territory altogether, or do they kind of throw in the towel on the season?
I think in this question it was looking more at thinking about this breeding site, for example, where Iris and Lewis have had now 3 years worth of nesting, and they're on the verge of potentially having their first successful year. How many more unsuccessful years might it take for them to say, this isn't a good place to nest, I'm going to move on? That kind of a sense.
That's a great question, and I was asking that question regarding Swainson's hawks recently because of a band encounter we got during the breeding season in Nevada versus where we banded the bird in Montana. So what does it take before the bird has to forfeit the site or say, this isn't going to work anymore, I'm wasting my time? I don't know, Eric.
Yeah, these birds are really patient. They're built for the long haul. I suspect that Iris is close to 20 years old. She's nested on this platform for 11 years, and she was nesting on the owl pole for at least 6 or 7 years before that. And she probably didn't start breeding until she was, 4, 5, 6, something like that. So she has been at this nest or one right nearby until we kicked her off the power lines for basically her whole breeding life. And she's had years where she's raised no chicks, where they've starved, and she's had successful years. From the birds we've been watching, it seems like they keep at it at the same place if they've been successful. But that's a really good question. One we don't know too much about here, and it's certainly relevant given issues like climate change. And if this nest, which has historically been a very productive one, if let's say it just it deteriorates, the Clark Fork becomes less and less of a good place for ospreys because of the difficult fishing conditions. We don't know at what point do they bail, but we don't. So the answer is we don't know, but it's a great question.
And one thing we do know, or at least that we're learning from the telemetry, is that these birds go through so much to find an area that's suitable. It's what it takes to become a breeding osprey, not just breeding age, but a breeding osprey, a mate, a successful breeder. We're learning that that takes a lot. So I think once you get established and you find that spot, you're not gonna fail.
For young birds that have reached breeding age, it can take them 2, 3, 4 years of wandering around thousands of miles, trying to find another partner, a good place, an available nest site. So yeah, I think Rob has hit the nail on the head that nest sites and partners are incredibly important, and it takes quite a while to find a good spot, get a nest, and get a good partner. So my feeling is if they've got a nest site and a partner, that kind of trumps going somewhere else and starting the dating game again. It's a good question.
Well, and sort of thinking about that partner and the role that these birds play in sort of successfully bringing off a nest, but sort of overlaying that on this idea of what happens when times are tough. We had Dana ask over email, during the years that the fishing is so hard, do the males always bring the fish to the nest, or are there times when they will just eat it themselves? And I think there's a lot of opinions about there, definitely, just from watching this cam, let's say, the status of the fish when Lewis brings it into the nest, for example, how much of it already has been eaten, whether or not he's bringing fish or out there just taking care of himself. And I wondered, is there information out there that's been gathered that can actually shed more light on it than just sort of the little bit of what we're seeing on camp?
Well, typically males will once they've caught a fish, they'll perch and eat the head off of it themselves, and we've seen this quite a bit. So we'll see a lot of fish come in while missing the head or the front part. That's pretty typical, but we've also been seeing Louie bring in fish that are completely whole and often fully alive and flopping around. And so it really depends. Yesterday Louie brought in 6 fish. I mean, wow. he was slaying it yesterday.
That's great.
And a whole bunch of those were fresh. He hadn't eaten any at all. So, but whether he eats fish on his own without coming back, I don't know. It's a little harder. Once the birds leave the nest to go fishing, it's hard to follow them generally. But I haven't seen Louie. Whenever I've seen him catch a fish, he doesn't stop and eat it himself. I've either seen him bring it back and eat a little bit off of it and then bring it to the nest, or deliver it whole. And also another thing we've seen is some of these, right now, they're mainly bringing in trout, several species of trout, and mountain whitefish. And especially for some of these larger trout, that trout will, Iris will feed the chick, let's say, and then the chick will go into a food coma and go to sleep, and then she'll feed off of it. and then maybe Louie will come back and grab it and go off and eat some of it, but there's still a couple pounds left, and then he'll come back to the nest, and so, you know, one of these great big trout, which sometimes can weigh, you know, twice what these ospreys weigh, that'll last, you know, the better part of 24 hours sometimes, where, you know, there's several bouts of feeding that, you know, all of them get to have a go at it several times. So it's a good question. Yeah, we don't know. I suspect that Louie's not off just pigging out by himself and not bringing in fish. I suspect, you know, when he gets a fish, he's pretty good at coming back with it.
Great. Yeah, and I think most people are pretty much everybody is uniform and they're cheering on of Louie, but everyone understands he's to take care of himself too.
Yeah, and you know, people have it's a natural thing to project human sorts of emotions and feelings and motivations onto these wild creatures, but it can be a little dangerous. And you know, I think that, you know, we've seen that both of these birds, the adults, they're driven like crazy to reproduce and protect this chick. And I mean, look at Iris. It's getting to be 90 degrees, and she's going to be cooking, and she's already doing the mombrella. She's devoted to raising this chick, and Louie is devoted to, you know, he's pretty hardwired to catch fish and bring him into the nest. So the fact that there have been periods of time where not a lot of fish have been brought in, it doesn't suggest that Louie is lazy or anything like that, or a reprobate and Irish should dump him. I think he's doing his hardest. It's maybe he is still a young bird, still learning. I think his fishing ability this year is better than it was last year. And I think it just points to the fact that it has been really difficult fishing conditions, and yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of this idea of hardwiring is a great segue into a couple of questions that we got regarding the nestlings. And so we saw some sibling aggression in the nest this year. The oldest chick was the one that eventually survived and is thriving right now in the nest. And many think that it's a female. But there is this thought, well, is there any information on like sex and hatching age, for example, hatching order, or is there something that affects what we see in this sibling aggression in the nest that's actually maybe hardwired, meaning the first egg is going to be maybe a female, the second egg is not, or something? Is there any information related to the nestlings and their sex and the aggression?
Well, that's a good question. We know that some birds, the females can control influence the gender of the chicks. We don't know that's the case for ospreys, and I think it is pretty much a coin flip myself for the ospreys, whether, you know, the first egg is a male or a female. But definitely the hatch order is sort of the name of the game for the chicks. And so in, I think all raptors, isn't it, Rob? They have this what's called this hatching asynchrony.
Yeah.
All hawks and owls and lots of other birds, by the way, herons and pelicans and lots of things. The females start incubating as soon as they lay the first egg. So what that means is and ospreys will lay up to 4 eggs. And so what that means is generally the first egg to hatch, that chick has maybe a 1 or 2, or sometimes a 3 or 4 day jump on the next chick. So you get these Russian dolls where you'll get the first chick being, you know, quite a bit bigger than the second chick, being quite a bit bigger than the third chick, and so forth. And this seems to be an adaptation, what's called hatching asynchrony, that produces these chicks of very different sizes. It seems to be an adaptation for unpredictable food supplies. And what I mean by that is, at the beginning of a breeding season, the birds might not be able to predict whether there's going to be a lot of fish that year or not very many fish. So the safest thing to do is lay the most number of eggs that they can produce. And then let's say that there's a lot of fish. Well, what that does is the biggest chick will get fed and then kind of go into a food coma. There's enough food, the next biggest one will get fed, and so on down the line. And we've seen that in the past where these birds have raised 3 or 4 chicks in really good food years. But in years like this, what happens is the bigger chicks, when they get hungry, it seems to trigger this behavior, this very aggressive behavior called siblicide, or well, they just peck on the smaller chicks and are very aggressive towards them. And the mom and the dad don't do anything. They just stand back. And it can be hard to watch when just to see the older chicks basically kill the younger chicks, peck them to death. But that only happens in years where there's low food supplies. And so it seems to be a physiological and behavioral adaptation of many, many, many species of birds for these unpredictable food supplies. And what we've seen happen this year is, there seems to be enough food to raise 1 chick, and lo and behold, we've got 1 great big healthy chick that we hope is going to fledge this year.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is, how do you get the fish there? And some people commented on just the interestingness of ospreys being such specialists and eating only fish. And do they eat only fish, for example? And how did they evolve to only eat fish? Do they have any evolutionary traits that seem to be adaptations for a life of fish eating? And so I know that's a big barrage of questions about fishing, even down to vision. How do ospreys deal with refraction and light off the water and aiming through the surface? And so I thought maybe we could try and treat those all together, and you could speak just a little bit about the biology of them being fish eaters, if there's anything known about that evolutionary path that got them there, and whether there's anything relating them to their food supply. Do they, like in some other species where predators sort of control, in a way, the prey population?
Go for that. All right.
That's a great question.
Those are really good questions. Well, ospreys are really interesting raptors. They certainly are probably the most specialized raptor, or one of the most specialized raptors. And we like to say that you just add water and you've got ospreys. They're really interesting in that you find them on every single continent except the Antarctic. So they're all over the world. And why they're so specialized, that's a good question. I suspect there was just a really good ecological niche that was available. There are other raptors that certainly do eat fish. Bald eagles will eat a lot of fish. But they have certainly gone down the road of extreme specialization as fish eaters. And why? You asked. I do happen to have some props here, and ospreys certainly do have some adaptations for this very specialized fishing lifestyle. And let me go grab our skeleton osprey back here. So this was an osprey that, let me get it here. This is an osprey skeleton. This one was electrocuted, unfortunately, but you can see how long its legs are. There's actually, when you take all the feathers off an osprey, there's not a lot to it, but you can see how long those legs are. And look at the fishing gear. They've got humongous big talons, and they're able, and I'll show you some other adaptations. But one of the things that's very, very difficult for ospreys is, if you think about it, when they go into the water, they might come out of the water. Well, let's say they latch onto a 8-pound fish, and they've got several pounds of water in their feathers. So that might be 10 pounds they're trying to get off the water. That's incredibly hard to do. The thrust that they need to generate to fly off the water with that much weight, maybe twice their body mass, is phenomenal. And here's one adaptation if our pectorals, our pecs, our breast muscles, on our chest, we don't have a keel like this. This is the breastbone of an osprey, and you can see this is the keel bone. So it's kind of like when you eat a chicken or a turkey, they've got this great big keel. But this is where one muscle, the pectoralis, the bird's pec, attaches to this. Ospreys, it's pretty remarkable. A third or more of their body mass can be made up by one muscle, this one muscle that attaches here. And this is the muscle that generates this movement, the flapping movement that gets them off the water. So they're very, very powerful flyers. So they're really good at diving, hitting the water at 100 miles an hour. And here's the business end of an osprey. You can see those great big curved talons, which are wicked for going into fish, but also they've got on the bottoms of their feet, if this focuses, the bottoms of their pads are like very, very rough sandpaper. So all this is special adaptations for grabbing onto fish and holding on to them. Their vision is exceptional. And here's an osprey skull. And so they've got good eyesight to the side, but they've also got eyeballs that look straight forward. So they're very good at looking straight down. They've also got these these round circular bones that protect the eyeball. You can see how big the eyeball is inside their skull. So all of this would be filled by eyeball. They've got these sort of special bones to protect the eye. So they do have, I'm sort of rambling here, but ospreys do have a lot of specializations for this specialized fishing lifestyle. It's a great question about refraction, and we suspect that most of how they become really good fishing birds is trial and error. The chicks have to learn it on their own. They're not taught by the adults. And that's one of the reasons we suspect that it takes them so long, many years before they can become successful breeders. So here, Rob, come on back in the picture, and you can add anything you've got.
Well, go ahead,
Rob.
Rob.
About whether do they just adjust for that refraction, or can they somehow see things? Are they anatomically able to correct for that refraction? I don't know, but one thing is for sure, it must. I mean, and I think we're seeing that it takes a long time to become really proficient at catching fish, and I think that's one of the reasons why we see it takes so long for these birds. Of all of the 450 banded osprey over the years, I think I have to confirm, but we may have only had one or two this season that actually made it to nesting, and we've never confirmed successful nesting. We may this year. That's a, with all those birds and all those bands, you would think we would have seen this already.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And that's, oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just one more thing. Many people may know, but some of the listeners may not know. Another general adaptation of birds has to do with the bone structure. So I'm holding here a beaver femur and a bird femur, and if I gave them to you, they're about the same size, about the same length. This one weighs about 4 or 5 times as much as this one. So beavers don't need light bones. So if we were to cut this in half, it'd be pretty solid. But birds have hollow bones, and here's a cross section of an osprey bone. And it's a little hard to see. There we go. But this is like a soda straw. It's basically a very thin hollow bone. There are some struts, bony struts throughout it, but this is an exceptionally light but strong bone. So this is one that's cut in half. And here's a mammal bone just for comparison. you can see it's got these great big thick walls. So an osprey skeleton, once you strip everything off, is surprisingly light.
Great. I think that you know, we have lots and lots of questions that we're not going to get to today, and since we're lucky enough to have Rob there, I wanted to spend maybe the last we're about 50 minutes into this hour, and I wanted to spend the last 10 minutes or so trying to dig into more of the banding and satellite work that's been done, primarily under your leadership, correct?
That's right. Yeah, we've we've been putting transmitters on Osprey since 2012 is when we first started, and we're at about, I think, 28 Osprey total. Let me look, 17 young and 11 adults. Of those, we're actively tracking, I think, 4. The transmitters fail, but
so when Rob says transmitter, he means a satellite transmitter. So I'll let him show you what a satellite transmitter looks like.
Okay, this is a 30-gram satellite transmitter, solar powered, and this will send a signal up to the satellites. We can get up to 12 what we call fixes in a day, and so we can get locations on these birds every hour on the hour for 12 locations a day. These will ride on the bird's back as such, and we adjust it. I'm trying to see what I got here for this camera.
That's good.
This is our breast patch, and so this is set up with a little breakaway. So if the bird picks at this long enough, these straps will come loose and the transmitter will fall off. But they'll carry these around. We've tracked them for several years with these units, and this is how we're able to learn so much about what happens with these birds once they leave the area. But it's a 30-gram transmitter, and quite durable, and the birds do quite well with them, actually, as we found out.
Here I've got a stuffed osprey here, and I'll just let Rob show you how he attaches.
Sure. We just very generally, we loop this. Well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take these off because if I'm normally
you can just put it on.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we attach it. It'll ride right in the middle of the bird's back, and we do all of our fine adjustments here with these little copper. We call them BGs because the guy who cuts a bunch of these was listening to the BGs when he was cutting them. But they're little copper furls, and we are able to compress those fine, make our fit just perfect so that we have about a finger. We can put about a finger, like a dog's collar, under the transmitter, and it'll ride on that bird. And they do amazingly well with these transmitters. And then it has, of course, the solar array is exposed to the sun. Osprey sit out in the sun a lot, and so they work really well. But it's a kind of a touchy operation. Takes us usually about 20 minutes to get one to fit right, and it actually is just as a side note, we put these on eagles and red tails, golden eagles and red tails as well. And it is such a particular little operation for me to do it so right that I didn't put one of these on for 2 years. I had other experts in the field show me again before I felt comfortable enough to do this. So,
well, that's really cool. I love it that viewers are able to see exactly what those satellite packs look like.
The other thing that Rob does that I'll let him talk about, and a great source of information, the satellite transmitters are pretty expensive. One of them costs with the satellite time, about $5,000.
$5,000 a year for the first year. $4,000, $3,500 for the hardware.
Yeah, so it's about $5,000 a pop. But the other thing that we do is band the osprey. So I'll let Rob show you how to do that.
So in order to do any of this work, you guys, I'm having kind of, so anyway, I'm going to hold this. This is a U.S. Geologic Survey band, bird banding laboratory band. And to do any of this work, we have to put one of these on the bird. And so it has a specific serial number to that individual bird. If somebody finds this band, I'm sure most of the viewers know this. I could see it here. You can't see it on camera, but there's a phone number on there to call if you encounter one of these. So you find a dead bird or you catch one if you're a researcher, or a rehabber, and you call that number into the bird banding lab, they relay that information to us, and they will carry this aluminum band on for their entire life. Now, a lot of what we know about the natural history of these birds comes from these band returns, especially longevity, mortality causes, and whatnot. What we started doing in 2010 was putting an auxiliary marker or a color band. And the shorebird people really got this going. And it works well for large birds, we're finding. So this is a practice band, X4, but we've put out 250 of these bands, these colored bands, on our Osprey, and we have about an 18% encounter rate. USGS band alone is probably about 5 or 6% encounter rate. So we're getting live encounters, sometimes multiple encounters of a specific individual, and we get a lot of movement data. And I think that this piece has become very exciting to us and other Osprey researchers as well. Whenever somebody takes a photo of one of these color bands, whether it's black with white alphanumerics or green, it goes right around our Osprey circles, and we start connecting each other, and we can usually find out in about a day where that bird came from.
That's so cool, and it's great to see exactly how big those bands are, because I think most viewers have seen it one time or another, you know, but it barely fits on a person's pinky. Really drives home kind of the size of these.
Like. Here's what they look like on this bird. Oops.
Yeah, that's a great look.
That blue alphanumeric, they're so easy to see. And people just with their cell phones snap pictures of birds. We've had people in Mexico send us photos and things.
Here's one that we're looking to check out. This was photographed by an 84-year-old guy about 100 miles from where we are now. You can't see it, but it's J4, and there it is, the male. I think it's the male. I'm going to go confirm that maybe this weekend. But this will be, if it's what we think it is, it's going to be our first dispersal, breeding dispersal of any of our 450 banded osprey.
So if that's your first bird, you've banded 450, you've put out 200 some secondary markers. Two questions come to mind that our viewers asked. One is, what do you know about where these birds in Montana go? Can you speak to where they generally go? And then secondly, why do you think you're only able to detect so few of those dispersals?
I'll take a stab at that, and then Eric can chime in too. And what we're basically finding out is that these birds, it takes a lot to become a breeding osprey. We talked about that. What we find is that these birds, these auxiliary markers are turning up in the same places where our telemetered birds go, our birds carrying those satellite transmitters. So we have a number of birds along the Gulf Coast of Texas, on both shores of mainland Mexico, as well as Central America. And that's where these tags are turning up. We have had a couple resightings in Louisiana and Arkansas that we haven't seen in our telemetered birds, but there's definitely, they complement each other really well. So Gulf Coast of Texas, Mexico, and Central America, but mostly the Gulf Coast and Mexico. That's where our birds are going.
And are there any... Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, and one of the things that, and I'll let Rob talk a little bit more about this, but the satellite data, since this unit is sending up, this antenna is sending up once an hour a signal to an Argos satellite and telling the satellite it's getting location. So within about 10 feet, we know where that bird is every hour on the, you know, so amazingly high resolution information. And what's been incredible is to see how what happens is female ospreys, breeding females, tend to leave first. And they just disappear one day and head south, and they hoof it. They can get down to their breeding, their wintering areas in a week, or you know, they can get down to Texas or Central America in a week or so. Yeah. And then the first time, I remember the first time Rob and Adam put one of these on an osprey, we were really excited watching it go south, and then it died. Well, we thought it died, but it just stopped moving. And then the second one went south, and then it died, and then the third one, and they hadn't died. If you blow up the map, what Rob was talking about is they go south and they fly really hard and really fast till they get there, and then when they get to their wintering spots, they essentially don't move for 6, 7, 8 months much.
No.
And then what's really incredible is most of those birds, when they come back north, they follow their southbound migration route incredibly closely. Sometimes they're flying over the exact same ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And when these birds first leave, like Eric was saying, the female leaves right away. She's done. Once they leave the nest, she's gone in like a week, a little more. And the male hangs around while I guess the young ones are learning how to make a living. It's a crash course though, because he gets out and then they're left on their own. And watching that first spring flights, is, I'm sure some of the viewers have, I know, and I also want to say, I know that we've had some frustrating, we're trying to get the Raptor tracker, some of the bugs worked out of it. It's taken a while, but we're getting really close. So hopefully we'll be able to share, you guys will be able to check out the tracks on the MPG Ranch Raptor tracker for this fall. But yeah, what these birds, some of these osprey, we've had a couple of the young ones where they're just heading south and all of a sudden they go hard east and they get out to a point like in Oklahoma or somewhere out that way, and then they shoot straight south, or they hang around the area like a reservoir or a golf course, hang around for a little bit and then head south. I mean, and when we talk about putting our own feelings or anthropomorphic, there we go, perfect. That shows what I was talking about, that blue line. It went down to like Grand Canyon, shot all the way over east and then down, and we see that with the yellow line as well. We had a couple more, but that's a nice illustration of these fall migrations. And the ones that are straight shots are almost certainly the adults. Mm-hmm. And the ones that kind of move around and curve around, those are the youngsters trying to figure out where to go.
The another interesting point is that the males and female, a male and female of a pair, they do not migrate together. And so, for example, Iris and Louie will not go south together, and we don't know where they spend their winters, but undoubtedly they don't see each other the whole off season. They've kind of got it figured out.
Yeah,
because they take a break from each other and then they come back to the same nest, sometimes within a day or so of each other, and they get to, romance is fresh again.
Yeah.
But the males and females migrate on their own to different places, and then the young don't go with the parents. They have to figure it out on their own, how to get south, where to go, and they have to find a good fishing spot.
It's got to be sort of perilous for them, just cutting loose and following instinct. And what we find is I can't remember if this was a question, but most estimates for raptors is 70%, 60 to 70% will die during that first year of life. And we have found that to be true with the osprey as well. And the ones that do survive with let's say with the transmitters, that's what we're talking about, they figure out how to make a living on their wintering grounds, but then they have to head north and undertake that 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 mile journey in some of them, back up to their summer area, their summer region, natal territories, natal grounds, and then they move about and try and figure out what they're going to do once they get back here. And I always envision it. I mean, it's a risky thing. Most of the birds that do die, if they survive 2 and 3 years on their wintering grounds, it's during that north migration, when they're exploring the area, the region that they were born in. That's when they run into trouble, whether it's a great horned owl, a golden eagle, and these are actual things we've been able to pretty much confirm. Great horned owl, golden eagle, bald eagle, and of course you have electrocution, vehicle collisions. But yeah, it's a tough deal to make it to be a successful nester.
And that's one of the reasons that a bird like Iris, I'm just in awe of her. She's worth her weight in gold. She's an experienced mother, and she's a sage elder in all the senses of the word. And I figure that over the course of her lifetime, she's probably fledged at least 40 chicks.
That's great.
So she's doing her bit for the osprey population. Charles, I know we're getting near the end of the hour. I've got just a couple things that I want to make sure we got in from this end.
Yeah, I think that's great. I was just about to sort of butt in a little bit and let you guys know we just sort of crested an hour. We can sit here as long as you guys would like, honestly.
Okay.
But
okay.
I wanted to sort of clue you in that we're sort of on the last little bit of the section here, and if there were some things you wanted to cover, we'd really love to hear it.
All right. Well, let me say a few things, and then we can, if there's other questions, I think we could stick around for a little bit. So I know a lot of people have been interested now that it looks like this one chick is doing really well, and we hope it survives and fledges. People have been wondering about a name of this chick. And so just to recap, the male is named after Louie Adams, who was a revered Salish elder, and he died on 25th of April 3 years ago. And just a little tiny bit after Louie Adams died, this new male showed up, and so we asked the Adams family if we could honor Louie by naming this newly arrived male after him, and they were gracious enough to allow that. So that's why Louie is named Louie. And I have a photograph in here of Louie Adams, and I'll post some of these on the Facebook page. But here's Louie Adams, and he gave the blessing to this building, the Missoula College, when it was being built. And he also blessed the osprey nest. So that's why Louie is called Louie. We're sitting on the original, this was the homeland of the Salish people. And so we feel very honored to have the Adams family, let us name this new male in honor of Louie. So I've asked the Adams family if they would like to name the chick now that it looks like it's going to survive, and they were excited about that. And so I just found out last night that the name they've come up with for the new chick is Lele, L-E apostrophe L-E, and this is Salish, and this was the name of Louie Adams' Aunt Harriet. And so I'll give more details of that. But so the Salish name for the chick, which was named by Louie Adams' family, is Lele. So that's kind of one thing I'm really excited about. So seems appropriate that we have a Salish chick coming out of this nest. And the other thing I just want to say really quickly is, come on over here, you guys. We've got two visitors. One of our long-term camera operators, a volunteer, Sharon Lee Miles, come on over. She has been helping run this camera, the Hellgate camera. Come on over, you guys. Come on. Don't be shy. Come on. Here, come on. Have a seat. So here's Sharon Lee. I've got to say it with the right Southern. Yeah. She made the trip from South Carolina. She's spending the week here. We feel real lucky about that. But she's been helping operate for years the camera behind the scenes. So, and then Laura Corwin, come on over here, Laura. Laura's from Seattle, and she's been watching the Hellgate Nest camera for a long time. And you made the trip over from Seattle today to come and see us band osprey chicks where there were no osprey chicks in the nest. But anyway, and I just wanted to extend the invitation that if people who are watching ever are in the Missoula area, please let us know, and we'd be happy to give you a behind-the-scenes tour of the nest and the camera room here and what it takes to operate the camera. So anyway, I just want to acknowledge two people who have been longtime fans of the Osprey or helping run the camera for many years. So special thanks to you guys.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great reminder to mention all the people who make this project a success. We've gotten to sit and luckily talk with both Erick and Rob today, who are, some of the brains that actually make the entire project run. But as Sharon showed you, there's a whole crew of volunteers behind the scenes, out remotely spread across the world in some cases, who are ferrying information, currying the best stuff, retweeting things, and moving the camera so we don't miss anything. And then there's a very committed viewing community that sometimes will drive even from Seattle to come see an osprey, right? That actually plays an important role in supporting both the work of the Montana Osprey Project, but as well as the Cornell Lab. They've been very generous helping support both of our projects. And I wondered if you wanted to mention anybody else on your end, Erick or Rob, that Delete has been amazing, stepping in whenever needed. Oh my gosh, it was great seeing her picture in the paper the other day. We saw an image from one of the bandings this week, or maybe it was last week. So I wonder if there are other people you'd like to call out here before winding this down.
Yeah, certainly Delete has been a big part of the Osprey team. Again, I just want to echo what Rob said. Our colleague Heiko Langner, who really started the project with Rob. Rob's Uncle Dave.
Yeah, my uncle, he purchased bucket trucks, and that's what got it all started. So he was a roofer, and he had these boom trucks, and I was like, wow, we could use these.
So Uncle Dave's roofing business and his bucket trucks are really what got things going with Rob. And then I'd also like to say that, University of Montana and the Missoula College here, there are so many partners. Riverside Health Center, there's many private businesses, local businesses, and groups, as you said, Charles, around the world. It takes a lot of people to run this project. And one of the cool things about Ospreys is that they really do bring people together in lots of from around the world. I mean, we see this with the Osprey viewer community, and that's very, very exciting to us. The other thing is that we're doing lots of education. We tend to think of this Montana Osprey Project as a three-legged stool. So don't step on the chick. So lots of research that Rob talked a little bit about, the looking at the heavy metals, and but also education. So we're doing lots and lots of education, all focused around ospreys. And the last 10 years or so, the numbers are pretty astounding. Tens of thousands of people have come out with us and attended various educational programs all up and down the river to learn about the importance of clean water, the Superfund, heavy metal pollution, and what's being done about it. And so we're finding that ospreys are a great vehicle to spread important information about the importance of environmental education.
Yeah, osprey are raptors, as some of the viewers probably know. At one time, when Charles, we talked about migration site. At one time, these were much maligned animals, large birds that kill things, and they kind of had a bad rap, and people used to kill them and shoot them all the time, and just didn't think they had a purpose. And it seems like osprey, people love osprey, and I think if people are loving osprey and they're appreciating them for what they do and watching these cameras, then they could spread that sort of osprey raptor love out a little bit more to the other raptor species, because in certain areas it's still tough to be a raptor. I mean, it's tough in a natural sense, but it's also tough because of our impact and because we still have people out there, Yeah,
you just earlier, like within the last week, Rob went and picked up a golden eagle or a bald eagle.
A golden eagle
that had been shot.
We don't know what happened. A great horned owl that had a BB in it. We see this a lot. So for anybody out there, just kind of give us, let your people know that spread the word that raptors are important and we shouldn't kill them. It's amazing how many still get shot. And I also, that telemetry data, I just want to say, thanks to the MPG Ranch, because they are able to help to support that, to fund that, and allow us to go out there and get those transmitters on those birds and just give us a whole different look into the natural history of these birds here in Western Montana.
I guess I'll just maybe end up giving one more big kudos to a group that's called the Natural Resources Damage Program. And so the legal settlement, I think Iris just flew off the nest. She might be getting hot and thirsty. Yep. She's going down to the river. Watch this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she's going into the river. She just dove into the river. Yeah, good camera operator. Who's on the camera? Look at that. She's getting her, look, she's dragging in the river. She's getting her feathers all wet. Now she's coming back. So she's turned herself into a swamp cooler.
Oh,
this is so cool. Yeah, so it's getting close to 90 degrees here now. So she just went, and you saw she flew along in the water.
I've never seen that.
And here she comes back.
I've heard of this. I've never seen it before.
Here she comes back. So she's bringing back probably a couple pounds of water. And watch when she lands. So her feathers will be all nice and cool and wet. And she'll probably sprinkle a bunch of that on the chick. And so she's just turned herself into a swamp cooler, and she'll help. So that'll help keep her and the chick cool as it's getting really hot. So well done. I don't know who's on the camera right now. I can rule out Sharon Lee. I know she's not on the camera, but well done, camera operator. That was really cool.
I think that might be. Go ahead. I was gonna say that might be a great combination of things there to head out on, with some really cool biology that we all got to view. And
so just the Natural Resources Damage Program was the money. It's run by the state of Montana, and they've been very, very careful and use this money incredibly wisely for education and cleanup of the Clark Fork River. So a lot of what we're doing is thanks to their wise stewardship.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm done.
Well, I really want to thank you both for spending the time this afternoon. It would probably be, the interest is just, there's been hundreds of people on watching today. I wouldn't doubt that sometime after migration, if you guys are interested in having another conversation, I have a whole series of slides that were sent over by RaptorView that I didn't even get to, all these maps, and I have videos. And so I think it'd be stuff that our audience would really love to see, and they'd probably have even more questions for you. So I'm really hopeful that we can have you guys back again on screen for our viewers.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
That'd be great. And we'll keep you updated of any color band encounters, and if that J4 actually breeds. That's a big one. We're hoping for J4.
That's exciting.
Wave goodbye, you guys.
Okay, well, thank you guys again for coming in and talking with our viewers, answering questions. Thanks for coming to see the Osprey in the back, and for being such a great volunteer as well back there. And look forward to seeing how the season turns out. Good luck to everybody. Thanks for all the hard work you've all put in. And it's been a wild ride so far. Hoping it continues to be something we can all learn from. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles.
Yep.
Bye-bye.